on a quiet spring evening in Detroit. May 12th, 1936. A knock at the door would change one man's life forever. Charles Poole, a devoted husband and federal worker, had spent his day fulfilling his duties, believing in the promise of a better America, a place where hard work and honesty could build a stable, peaceful life. Little did he know, lurking outside his doorstep were figures who thrived not on fairness or justice, but on fear and hatred. These men belonged to a secret organization called the Black Legion, a group whose actions would shock the nation and leave a mark on history. Charles, like many others, had no idea that his life was about to intersect with a hidden network operating in plain sight. The Black Legion was not the familiar face of public rallies or political speeches. It was the quiet, shadowy force that crept into neighborhoods, workplaces, and even government offices. Its members were ordinary men on the surface, but behind closed doors, they were orchestrating acts designed to intimidate, manipulate, and control. And that night, Charles Poole became one of their victims. Imagine the fear of a man who opens his door to neighbors he trusts, only to find himself surrounded by strangers cloaked in secrecy. It is a moment that captures the essence of terror, not the loud, chaotic type you might see in movies, but the chilling kind that makes you question who you can trust and whether safety is ever guaranteed. Charles Poole's story is a reminder of how hidden threats can quietly shape the lives of innocent people. But beyond the fear and the tragedy, there is a lesson for all of us. History often teaches through the lives of those affected by injustice. Charles Poole's fate shines a light on a dark chapter in America's past, revealing the dangers of extremism, secrecy, and unchecked prejudice. It reminds us that vigilance, awareness, and standing up for fairness are essential, not just for our own safety, but for the protection of our communities. In telling this story, we also honor the lives of those who suffered quietly and whose names might otherwise have been forgotten. Every detail, from the ordinary nature of Charles' life to the extraordinary cruelty of the Black Legion, helps us understand the scale of their impact and the resilience required to confront it. If you want to explore more stories like this, uncovering hidden truths and learning from history's lessons, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By joining our community, you are not just watching history, you are connecting with the people, the struggles, and the events that shape the world we live in today. Stay with us, because the story of Charles Poole and the Black Legion is only the beginning of a journey into the shadows of America's past, and there is much more to uncover beneath the surface of 1930s America. In towns and cities that seemed ordinary to Persersby, there existed a network so secretive and insidious that few even knew it was there. Yet its presence was felt in every corner it touched, shaping lives through fear and caution. This organization, known as the Black Legion, was unlike any group most Americans had encountered. It was more calculated, more disciplined, and more dangerous than the familiar specter of the Ku Klux Klan, operating not in the open with marches and rallies, but in the shadows, where power and influence were quietly amassed, and control could be exercised without public scrutiny. Its members, seemingly ordinary men by day, workers, neighbors, even public officials, were by night part of a carefully orchestrated hierarchy designed to extend their reach into every part of society that mattered to them. The Black Legion thrived on secrecy, understanding that visibility could be a weakness, and it used the cloak of normalcy as a weapon. Cities like Detroit, Cleveland, and Indianapolis, which were already experiencing the tensions of rapid demographic changes, became fertile ground for their expansion. Black families migrating north, immigrants seeking opportunity, and anyone who deviated from the narrow cultural and religious ideals of the group found themselves under scrutiny, suspicion, and sometimes direct threat. What made the Legion especially formidable was its ability to blend in. While its members pledged loyalty, obedience, and silence in terrifying initiation ceremonies, they maintained positions within government offices, police departments, and city councils, creating a parallel system of influence that operated alongside legitimate institutions. In this way, they could manipulate decisions, protect their own, and extend the reach of their ideology without ever drawing attention to the sheer breadth of their operations. To understand the true scope of the Black Legion's power, one must picture the duality of their existence, the men walking the streets as everyday citizens, discussing wages, families, and community matters, while simultaneously participating in secret councils where strategies for intimidation, abduction, and violence were meticulously planned. Recruitment was both a tool of expansion and a demonstration of control, as potential members were often coerced through threats, forced oaths, and psychological pressure, ensuring that each person who joined was bound not only by shared ideology, but by fear of consequences should they speak out or attempt to leave. These oaths were not empty words. They were contracts with their own lives on the line, a chilling reminder that leaving the Legion was far more dangerous than staying within its ranks. The organization's operations extended beyond local acts of intimidation. Reports of stolen firearms, arson, and even attempts to create chemical devices intended to harm communities reveal a calculated approach to instilling terror that was unprecedented at the time. They did not rely solely on brute force. They understood that the perception of omnipresence could be as effective as any weapon. Families' new neighbors could be members, workplaces could harbor hidden agents, and city services could be influenced from within. This blend of overt and covert tactics allowed the Legion to maintain control in ways that ordinary citizens could scarcely detect until tragedy struck, as it did with Charles Poole and countless others whose lives were disrupted or destroyed in the pursuit of a vision steeped in prejudice and hate. Yet the story of the Black Legion is also one of insight into human behavior, the dangers of unchecked ideology, and the fragility of systems when infiltration goes unnoticed. While their actions were extreme, they relied on ordinary mechanisms, jobs, friendships, civic roles to integrate themselves into the fabric of society. This careful placement meant that the fear they inspired was not only about direct violence, but also about uncertainty. Who could be trusted? Which doors were truly safe? And which institutions might be compromised? Their existence demonstrated that extremism could be effective not merely through overt displays of power, but through subtle manipulation and the quiet accumulation of influence, making them a case study in how hidden networks can operate within open societies, threatening both safety and trust simultaneously. The Black Legion's narrative also serves as a stark reminder of the consequences when ideology goes unchallenged and communities fail to remain vigilant. While the group eventually faced exposure through investigative efforts sparked by high-profile tragedies, their decade-long existence shows how quickly secretive organizations can grow, adapt, and embed themselves into the institutions that people assume are protective. Understanding their history is not simply an academic exercise. It is a lesson in recognizing the signs of covert power, the mechanisms by which ordinary individuals can be drawn into dangerous ideologies, and the importance of transparency and accountability within all levels of society. By examining the story of the Black Legion, one gains a deeper appreciation for the resilience required by those who opposed them, the bravery of witnesses and investigators, and the ongoing relevance of vigilance in protecting communities from invisible threats. The story resonates because it is not merely about a group of extremists in the past. It is about how secrecy, fear, and ambition can intertwine to shape the world around us in ways that are both subtle and profoundly destructive. As history demonstrates, even the most disciplined and organized groups are ultimately constrained by the power of collective awareness and the courage of those willing to confront injustice. For viewers today, the Black Legion's story invites reflection on the ways in which hatred, fear, and manipulation can infiltrate ordinary life, and it underscores the importance of civic responsibility and community engagement in preserving justice and equity. If we commit to remembering these lessons and sharing them widely, the dark chapters of history can serve as guides for building stronger, more vigilant societies where the principles of fairness and humanity are protected. In the decades following World War I, America was a nation in motion, its cities swelling with new faces, voices, and hopes. Yet beneath the surface of opportunity and progress lay deep currents of tension that would shape the lives of countless individuals. The 1920s were a time of dramatic social change, when black families, fleeing the harsh realities of the Jim Crow South, moved north in search of safety, employment, and the promise of dignity. And when waves of immigrants from Europe brought with them the traditions, languages, and dreams of entirely new worlds, these migrations brought energy, creativity, and labor to burgeoning urban centers, but they also unsettled established communities, particularly among white working-class men who felt their livelihoods, neighborhoods, and social hierarchies were being challenged. It was in this climate of rapid change, economic uncertainty, and cultural anxiety that the seeds of extremism found fertile ground, nurtured by both fear and resentment, and crystallized into organized movements determined to preserve a narrow vision of what America should be. The Black Legion emerged from these shadows, an organization that drew its power from the uncertainties of the era and the unspoken biases that festered in everyday life. Its members saw themselves as defenders of a threatened order, and they were guided as much by ideology as by propaganda that glorified a past that never truly existed. Among the cultural forces that influenced them, one in particular stands out: the 1915 film The Birth of a Nation. Presented as entertainment, the film wove a narrative that celebrated white supremacy under the guise of historical drama, portraying vigilant groups as heroic and painting black communities as menacing threats to society. The film's reach and impact cannot be overstated. It rekindled the Ku Klux Klan in Atlanta and inspired a nationwide resurgence of racial fear, offering a visual and emotional blueprint for those who would later join the Black Legion. For viewers of the era, the film's images were powerful and persuasive, framing prejudice as patriotism, hatred as protection, and secrecy as noble. The Black Legion, in many, absorbed these messages, translating them into a code of conduct, rituals, and actions that made their presence not only felt but feared. Yet the emergence of the Legion was not solely about ideology on a screen. It was a direct response to the changing demographics of northern cities. Detroit, Cleveland, Indianapolis, and other industrial hubs saw the arrival of black families seeking jobs in factories, construction, and service industries, as well as Italian, Jewish, and other immigrant communities eager to carve out new lives. As these populations gained employment, established social roles shifted, and long-standing racial and ethnic hierarchies were challenged. The Black Legion capitalized on these anxieties, presenting itself as a shield for men who believed their status was under threat. Promising solidarity, protection, and a sense of belonging in a world that felt increasingly unstable. Their rhetoric was infused with both fear and urgency, portraying every black family, immigrant, or non-traditional Protestant as part of a grand, coordinated disruption of American life. The organization's methods of recruitment and enforcement reflected this duality of social anxiety and disciplined operation. New members were not simply invited, they were tested, sometimes coerced, and bound through oaths that demanded secrecy, obedience, and unquestioned loyalty. The rituals were designed to instill a sense of fear, purpose, and belonging simultaneously, reinforcing the narrative that the outside world was hostile and only the Legion could provide safety and authority. Their targets were broad: those who challenged labor norms, religious differences, or racial hierarchies, but the focus on black families moving north was particularly acute, as these migrations symbolized both economic competition and a social shift that threatened the worldview of the Legion's members. The power of propaganda extended beyond films and speeches into everyday life, shaping perceptions, justifying violence, and normalizing secrecy. The Black Legion's narrative presented itself as the protector of morality, the defender of a cultural ideal, and the guardian of order, allowing its members to rationalize acts that would otherwise seem unthinkable. Arson, intimidation, abduction, and even murder were reframed as necessary responses to perceived threats, and the organization's infiltration of government offices, police departments, and civic institutions ensured that their ideology could influence decision-making and shield perpetrators from scrutiny. In essence, the Legion transformed fear and uncertainty into an apparatus of control, operating with both precision and impunity while remaining largely invisible to the wider public. The rise of the Black Legion in the 1920s was a story of how social change, migration, and cultural messaging can intersect to produce a force capable of altering lives on a profound level. It demonstrates the ways in which fear, reinforced by media, propaganda, and shifting demographics, can catalyze secretive organizations that wield both influence and violence. By tracing this emergence, we see not only the personal tragedies it caused, as with Charles Poole and others, but also the broader societal lesson that vigilance, awareness, and critical thinking are essential to prevent fear from being manipulated into oppression, and to ensure that societies remain resilient in the face of transformative change. For those watching today, the story of the Black Legion reminds us that history is rarely confined to textbooks. It lives in the neighborhoods, workplaces, and communities where ordinary people navigate extraordinary pressures. As the Black Legion grew in influence during the 1930s, its internal structure became a reflection of both military precision and ideological rigidity, transforming what might have appeared to outsiders as a loosely connected group of men into an organized and formidable force that operated with deliberate intent. The membership was largely drawn from white working-class Protestant communities, men who were navigating the economic uncertainties of the Great Depression, who felt threatened by social changes, and who were searching for a sense of identity and control in a rapidly shifting world. For these men, the Legion offered more than a community. It offered a hierarchy, a purpose, and a carefully constructed sense of belonging. But that belonging came at a high cost, requiring total commitment, unquestioning obedience, and the willingness to participate in actions that reinforced the group's power and secrecy. The organization was divided with striking precision into brigades, regiments, and companies, each with specific roles and responsibilities, ensuring that the group could mobilize quickly and respond efficiently to perceived threats. This highly militarized structure allowed the Black Legion to operate simultaneously on multiple levels, coordinating intimidation campaigns, recruitment efforts, and covert operations across several cities without drawing attention to the true scale of its influence. Members were assigned duties based not only on loyalty but also on their ability to execute complex tasks, creating a culture in which discipline and conformity were paramount. and where deviation from prescribed behavior could lead to severe consequences. The very design of this structure made it difficult for outsiders, including law enforcement, to fully understand or penetrate the network, as each level of command insulated the next, and information was tightly controlled through a hierarchy of secrecy. Initiation into the Legion was far from ceremonial. It was a calculated exercise in psychological conditioning, intimidation, and assertion of control. Prospective members were subjected to elaborate rituals that reinforced the organization's values while instilling fear and a profound sense of obligation. Recruits were often coerced into participating under duress, sometimes brought to secluded locations under false pretenses, and confronted with stark displays of uniformed, armed members standing in formation, a visual reminder of the power and cohesion of the group. During these rituals, they were asked to swear oaths of secrecy and loyalty, pledging to obey all commands, to never reveal the organization's activities, and to protect its members at all costs. The act of taking this oath was not merely symbolic. It was a psychological contract that bound the individual to the Legion's mission and ensured that the organization could rely on absolute obedience. The rituals were deliberately intense, combining the threat of immediate physical harm with the promise of belonging. And in doing so, they transformed ordinary men into operatives willing to participate in acts that reinforced the Legion's objectives. This militarized structure extended beyond recruitment and ritual into the operational tactics of the Black Legion. Every member was expected to be armed, and firearms were treated not simply as tools of defense, but as instruments of power, symbols of authority, and means of enforcing compliance both within the group and among those targeted outside it. The Legion maintained a strict system for ensuring that its members had access to weapons, whether through legal channels or by other, less transparent means, reinforcing the organization's capacity to intimidate, threaten, and act decisively when necessary. Beyond firearms, the Legion employed strategies of surveillance, information gathering, and manipulation of local institutions, embedding its influence in ways that were difficult to detect but profoundly impactful on communities. This combination of hierarchy, armed readiness, and operational secrecy made the Black Legion an entity that was at once terrifying and efficient, capable of projecting power far beyond what its visible membership might suggest. Moreover, the culture within the Legion was reinforced by an ideology that linked loyalty to racial and social purity, creating an environment in which obedience was morally framed as a civic duty. Members were taught to view the world as a series of threats to their way of life, and the Legion's structure provided both the means and justification for confronting those threats. Each brigade and regiment became a microcosm of control, where conformity was rewarded and dissent was punished, where rank dictated responsibility, and where the boundaries between personal morality and organizational mandate were deliberately blurred. This internal cohesion allowed the Legion to maintain continuity and operational capacity, even when facing external scrutiny. And it created a sense of invulnerability among members who felt that they were part of something larger, disciplined, and inevitable. The combination of militarized organization and strict initiation rituals also served to amplify the psychological impact of the Legion on its targets. Communities living under the shadow of the organization understood that its members were not random actors. They were trained, organized, and connected, capable of coordinated action that could strike at any time. The mere existence of such a structured and disciplined group created an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty, reinforcing the Legion's control even without overt violence in every instance. Families, labor organizers, immigrants, and black residents recognized that the threat was systemic, not merely individual, and that the power of the Legion derived as much from its structure and internal discipline as from its acts themselves. Through this careful organization, the Black Legion transformed fear into a strategic advantage, turning ordinary men into an orchestrated force capable of both influencing society and defending its ideology. The interplay of hierarchy, ritual, coercion, and armed readiness allowed the Legion to operate in ways that were far more sophisticated than many other extremist groups of the time, ensuring that its reach extended across neighborhoods, workplaces, and institutions in ways that were difficult to dismantle. By examining the Legion's militarized structure and the intensity of its initiation practices, we gain a clearer understanding of how ideology, organization, and psychology intersect to create a network capable of projecting power, sustaining loyalty, and leaving a lasting imprint on the communities it touched, demonstrating the profound consequences of secrecy and discipline when wielded in the service of intolerance. The Black Legion's vision of America was narrow, rigid, and defined by an almost obsessive desire to control who belonged and who did not. And those who fell outside their self-fashioned boundaries quickly became the targets of intimidation, harassment, and violence. Their enemies were defined as anyone who challenged their worldview or deviated from the uniformity they demanded. And this list was broad and diverse: Black families seeking safety and prosperity in northern cities, immigrants who brought with them different languages, customs, and faiths, Catholics whose beliefs were deemed incompatible with the Legion's rigid Protestant ideal, labor organizers advocating for fair wages and working conditions, and countless others who simply lived in ways that the Legion considered un-American. To the members, these individuals were not merely neighbors or co-workers, they were threats to an imagined social order, and every action taken against them was justified as defense of morality, community, and nation. The organization's campaigns were neither sporadic nor impulsive. They were meticulously planned and executed with precision. Hit lists were compiled in secrecy, cataloging the names of those deemed undesirable, and these lists were treated as living documents, constantly updated and acted upon with calculated urgency. For the individuals targeted, daily life became a landscape of fear, uncertainty, and suspicion, where every knock on the door, every stranger in a neighborhood, or even a casual conversation could signal danger. The Legion understood the power of perception and the way fear itself could paralyze communities, and they wielded this intangible weapon as skillfully as they did their firearms, fires, or other tools of coercion. Families who had migrated north to escape oppression found that freedom and opportunity were now shadowed by an invisible presence, a force that infiltrated their workplaces, neighborhoods, and local institutions, and which could strike with both subtlety and sudden violence. In Detroit and surrounding cities, Black families lived with the knowledge that every step outside the home carried risk, not just from unknown strangers, but from organized, coordinated attacks that were informed by knowledge gathered through surveillance, infiltration, and internal networks of information. The Legion's members often held positions within civic offices, police departments, and local government, allowing them to manipulate responses to complaints, misdirect investigations, and protect fellow members from scrutiny, ensuring that victims had little recourse and that the group's reach extended beyond what could be easily seen. Labor organizers, who sought to improve working conditions and protect employees from exploitation, were particularly vulnerable. Men and women advocating for fair treatment in factories, plants, and farms found themselves targeted not only because of their political activity, but because labor empowerment threatened the Legion's conception of social hierarchy. Those who tried to organize strikes, negotiate for fair wages, or assert collective bargaining rights risked not just professional retaliation, but personal danger, including abduction, harassment, and worse. The group's deliberate focus on these individuals reflected a strategy designed to maintain economic and social dominance, reinforcing the idea that anyone who stepped outside the narrow definitions of acceptable behavior was subject to correction or elimination. The terror inflicted by the Black Legion was not limited to physical violence. Psychological manipulation was a cornerstone of their strategy. For communities aware of the group's presence, even unproven threats could destabilize everyday life. The fear of abduction, assault, or public shaming created an environment in which people were constantly on edge, forced to question whom they could trust and how they could navigate their own neighborhoods. This climate of uncertainty was a key aspect of the organization's control, demonstrating that power could be exercised as effectively through fear as it could through overt action. The Legion's attacks also reflected a broader ideology that sought to enforce conformity and punish deviation. Each black family, each immigrant household, each labor organizer represented both a practical and symbolic threat, a challenge to the worldview that the Legion held sacred. By targeting these groups, the organization reinforced its narrative of superiority and moral authority, convincing members that their actions were both necessary and righteous, while also sending a chilling message to the wider community. Resistance or difference would not be tolerated. The secret hit lists were not mere tools of record-keeping. They were instruments of psychological warfare, enabling the Legion to maintain a sense of omnipresence, a constant reminder that no one was truly safe and that the group's influence could reach anyone, anywhere, at any. Within this framework, the Black Legion operated not as a spontaneous band of extremists but as a calculated, disciplined network whose actions were methodical and whose objectives were strategic. Their influence extended into neighborhoods, workplaces, and public institutions, creating a reality in which ordinary life could be disrupted without warning and where survival depended on vigilance, caution, and sometimes sheer luck. Families and communities lived in the shadow of this covert power, their daily routines infiltrated by the knowledge that one misstep or simply being identified as a target could provoke the full force of the Legion's wrath. The legacy of these attacks is profound, offering insight into how extremist groups can manipulate fear, perception, and social tension to enforce conformity and maintain control. The Black Legion's targeting of diverse groups demonstrates the intersection of ideology and action, revealing how deeply ingrained prejudice, combined with organization and secrecy, can disrupt entire communities and distort the social landscape. By examining these events, we gain not only a clearer understanding of the mechanisms of terror, but also a reminder of the importance of awareness, resilience, and the protection of vulnerable populations in the face of covert threats. This story, chilling in its detail, illustrates how structured extremism can infiltrate society, turning ordinary citizens into both perpetrators and victims, and leaving an enduring imprint on the history of communities struggling for equality, safety, and justice. The Black Legion's ability to impose fear and maintain control rested not only on the ideology it propagated or the secrecy it enforced, but also on the extreme measures its members were willing to take to achieve their goals, blending brutality with strategy in ways that left entire communities living under constant threat. Firearms were a cornerstone of their operations, and every member was expected to be armed at all times, not simply as a symbol of loyalty but as a practical instrument of enforcement. The acquisition of weapons was taken seriously, whether through lawful means or by other channels, ensuring that the organization could respond swiftly to any perceived challenge and that its members felt empowered to act without hesitation. The very presence of a gun in the hands of a Black Legion operative transformed ordinary encounters into situations fraught with tension. As neighbors, co-workers, and even public officials became acutely aware that retaliation could come with lethal consequences. Beyond the use of firearms, the Legion employed arson as both a practical and symbolic tool. Entire structures, from homes to barns, were targeted, often those belonging to labor organizers, immigrants, or black families who represented a challenge to the group's ideology. Fire served multiple purposes. They inflicted tangible damage, disrupted lives and livelihoods, and communicated a clear, terrifying message to the wider community about the reach and ruthlessness of the organization. These acts were not random. They were carefully planned to maximize psychological impact, demonstrating to both current targets and potential opponents that resistance would not be tolerated, and that the group could operate with impunity while concealing its broader operations. Perhaps most chilling, however, were the reports of chemical weapons experiments and devices intended for mass casualties. In the mid-1930s, former members recounted that the Legion's leadership had explored the use of gas and other chemical means to inflict harm on targeted populations during public gatherings, revealing a willingness to embrace new technologies of terror in pursuit of their vision. This combination of traditional violence with experimental methods highlights the organization's adaptability and the extent to which it sought to extend its influence far beyond what ordinary fear tactics could achieve. Even the mere knowledge that such devices existed instilled profound anxiety, as communities understood that the Legion's potential for destruction was not limited to individual attacks, but could escalate to unprecedented scale at a moment's notice. Abduction and intimidation were central to the Legion's operations, and they were executed with the same calculated precision that characterized the group's organizational structure. Victims were often lured under false pretenses, isolated from witnesses, and subjected to ritualistic displays of power intended to break their will and enforce submission. The psychological effects of these abductions were profound. The terror did not end when the victim was released or when news of a disappearance faded from headlines. Families and communities internalized the risk, adjusting their behavior to avoid confrontation and reinforcing the Legion's control through the invisible weight of fear. Stories from the era describe individuals forced to kneel in front of armed men in black robes, pledging obedience under the threat of immediate violence, a ritual that blurred the line between coercion and indoctrination and ensured that those who survived still carried the psychological scars of their experience. Assassination was, tragically, the most irreversible form of the Legion's enforcement, and it was employed with chilling efficiency. Profile cases, such as the murder of Charles Poole, highlighted the organization's capacity to eliminate individuals whose presence or identity conflicted with their agenda, often under circumstances that obscured the true perpetrators. Many deaths were initially attributed to accidents, misfortune, or self-inflicted causes, but careful investigation later revealed patterns consistent with targeted elimination, demonstrating the lengths to which the Legion would go to protect its secrecy and uphold its ideology. These acts were not random. They were strategic, intended to remove threats, silence dissent, and maintain the perception that the Legion's power was absolute, extending beyond the reach of law enforcement or civic oversight. The interplay of firearms, arson, chemical weapons, abduction, intimidation, and assassination created an environment in which fear became a self-reinforcing mechanism. Communities learned to navigate daily life as if constantly under observation, adjusting routines, avoiding certain locations, and remaining wary of neighbors or officials who might be connected to the group. This pervasive sense of threat amplified the impact of individual acts of violence, as the psychological control exerted by the Legion was as important as the physical damage it inflicted. The organization's methods were carefully calibrated to sustain this dual impact, ensuring that both direct victims and the broader population understood the consequences of defiance. Moreover, the Legion's tactics demonstrated an unsettling adaptability. The group was not content to rely solely on brute force. They integrated their ideology with practical tools of terror, ranging from firearms for immediate enforcement to arson and chemical devices for broader impact, and from psychological intimidation to the calculated removal of individuals through abduction and assassination. Each method reinforced the others, creating a network of threat that could be applied selectively or broadly, depending on the objective and the perceived level of resistance. The result was an organization capable of operating both openly and covertly, maintaining its power through a combination of fear, loyalty, and strategic violence. By examining the Black Legion's operational methods, it becomes clear that their power derived not just from the number of members or the fervor of their ideology, but from a systematic approach to terror that combined physical, psychological, and social tools in a coherent strategy. The use of firearms, arson, chemical devices, abduction, intimidation, and assassination allowed the group to enforce its worldview, suppress opposition, and instill a pervasive sense of vulnerability in the communities it sought to control. In doing, the Legion left an enduring imprint on the social landscape, illustrating how organized extremism can extend beyond ideology into the deliberate manipulation of fear, demonstrating both the human capacity for cruelty and the profound importance of vigilance, justice, and societal resilience in the face of invisible threats. The murder of Charles Poole, a man whose life had been ordinary in its devotion to family, work, and faith, became an unexpected catalyst that would unravel one of the most secretive and dangerous extremist organizations in American history, illustrating how even the most clandestine networks are vulnerable to exposure when individual actions intersect with the pursuit of justice. On that fateful night in May 1936, when Poole was abducted by members of the Black Legion, his disappearance initially seemed like yet another shadowy crime, easily concealed within the anonymity of urban streets and backroads. Yet the brutal nature of his killing would set in motion a chain of events that revealed the full extent of the Legion's reach and the depths of its violence. As investigators pieced together the fragments of the abduction and murder, it became clear that the organization operating behind the scenes was not a loose confederation of extremists but a structured, highly organized network capable of executing coordinated attacks while simultaneously infiltrating institutions of government, law enforcement, and civic leadership, a revelation that sent shockwaves through communities previously unaware of the threat living quietly among them. The turning point came with the confession of Dayton Dean, a man who had been directly involved in Poole's murder and who, confronted with the weight of evidence and the inevitability of legal consequences, chose to speak. Dean's testimony was not only a personal act of conscience or survival, it was a key that unlocked decades of hidden terror, exposing the elaborate structure of the Black Legion, the secretive rituals that bound its members, and the systematic methods they employed to intimidate, harm, and eliminate those they deemed undesirable. Through his detailed account, law enforcement officials gained unprecedented insight into an organization that had operated in shadows for years, providing the missing link needed to connect unsolved disappearances, unexplained deaths, and a network of threats that had long eluded public scrutiny. Dean described the hierarchies, the initiation ceremonies, the use of weapons, and the psychological conditioning that ensured obedience, all of which painted a chilling portrait of a group that thrived on secrecy, coercion, and the manipulation of fear, revealing not only the criminal acts themselves but the ideology that motivated them and the pervasive sense of invincibility cultivated among members. Once Dean's confession was made public, prosecutors acted swiftly, understanding that the moment offered a rare opportunity to dismantle an organization that had long operated beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement. Investigations expanded rapidly, uncovering evidence that linked Legion members to abductions, assaults, arson, and murders across multiple cities. The network, once thought to be unassailable due to its secrecy and infiltration of civic institutions, was exposed layer by layer as investigators meticulously followed the trails Dean illuminated. Witnesses came forward, corroborating details of rituals and attacks, and patterns of disappearance and violence began to make sense within the broader context of the Legion's systematic campaign of terror. Each revelation not only strengthened the legal case against individual members, but also undermined the psychological control the Legion had exercised over communities, demonstrating that the organization's perceived omnipotence could be challenged when courage and law intersected. The trials that followed were unprecedented in scope. 12 members were immediately brought to court for their roles in Poole's abduction and murder, and 10 were convicted. But the legal process did not stop there. Dean's testimony opened the door for a series of further prosecutions, targeting individuals responsible for other violent acts, conspiracies, and plots that had long gone unpunished. Authorities meticulously examined the evidence of arson, intimidation, and even plans for chemical attacks, holding members accountable not just for specific crimes but for the larger network of coordinated violence they had maintained. Over the course of months, dozens of additional Legion members were indicted, tried, and sentenced for offenses ranging from conspiracy and abduction to obstruction of justice, reflecting both the thoroughness of the legal process and the depth of the Legion's infiltration into society. What emerged from these prosecutions was not merely the conviction of perpetrators, but the dismantling of the Black Legion as a coherent, operational entity. The organization's military-like hierarchy, once a source of strength and intimidation, became a framework for accountability as courts systematically examined the roles and responsibilities of each member. Leaders who had orchestrated campaigns of terror found themselves in prison. Mid-level operatives were held responsible for participation in violent acts, and the very secrecy that had protected the organization now made it vulnerable to legal scrutiny. Communities that had lived under the shadow of the Legion began to breathe more freely, witnessing firsthand that the combination of bravery, evidence, and persistent investigation could topple a network that had seemed untouchable. Beyond the immediate legal outcomes, the prosecutions served as a broader societal lesson about the vulnerabilities of extremist organizations that rely on secrecy, fear, and infiltration for survival. The Black Legion's downfall demonstrated how individual courage exemplified by Dean's decision to confess combined with systematic law enforcement could disrupt and dismantle a network that appeared, for decades, to operate without consequence. It also highlighted the importance of transparency, community vigilance, and institutional integrity in preventing such groups from gaining footholds in society. And the case became a model for understanding how complex networks of intimidation and violence could be exposed and held accountable. The murder of Charles Poole, tragic as it was, catalyzed a transformation in public awareness, legal accountability, and historical understanding, ensuring that the Black Legion's reign of terror could no longer remain hidden. Through Dean's confession and the subsequent prosecutions, the veil of secrecy was lifted, crimes were punished, and communities regained a sense of security that had long been denied. The story illustrates both the capacity for human cruelty when fear and ideology intersect, and the power of justice, testimony, and societal action to restore order, affirm moral responsibility, and provide a blueprint for confronting clandestine extremism in the future, leaving a legacy that underscores the necessity of vigilance, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. The story of the Black Legion is not merely a tale of past horrors. It is a cautionary account that echoes across decades, demonstrating how extremism can silently infiltrate the very institutions meant to protect democracy, and how the impact of such covert networks can extend far beyond the immediate victims. While the Legion was eventually dismantled through legal action, its existence revealed uncomfortable truths about the vulnerabilities within society, highlighting that ideology, when combined with secrecy, organization, and the willingness to exploit fear, can penetrate institutions, manipulate power, and threaten the fundamental principles of justice and equality by embedding themselves within government offices, law enforcement, and civil service positions. Members of the Legion created a parallel structure of authority that allowed them to act with impunity, making ordinary citizens feel powerless in the face of an invisible, yet formidable, presence. The legacy of the Black Legion extends beyond its direct acts of terror, influencing both the strategies and the awareness of later extremist groups. The meticulous structure, the secrecy, and the combination of psychological and physical intimidations served as a blueprint for other organizations seeking to impose their will through fear and manipulation, illustrating the ways in which organized hate can endure, adapt, and resurface under different guises in the decades that followed. Even though the Legion's peak of influence was short-lived, the lessons drawn from its operations informed both law enforcement and the public about the necessity of vigilance, transparency, and community resistance in confronting extremist networks, providing a historical lens through which modern societies can evaluate the threats posed by covert actors who exploit fear and ideology for power. On a personal level, the reach of the Legion left lasting marks on individuals and families who encountered its violence and intimidation. One of the most poignant examples is found in the life of Malcolm X, whose family experienced the pervasive threat of racial violence in Michigan. As he later reflected, the climate created by groups like the Black Legion profoundly shaped his understanding of systemic racism, extremism, and the fragility of safety within supposedly democratic spaces. The experiences of those who lived under the shadow of the Legion reveal the deep psychological and societal impacts of clandestine extremism, showing that beyond physical harm, the manipulation of fear and the erosion of trust in community and governance can leave long-lasting scars that influence generations. The story of the Black Legion is also a reminder of the importance of courage and accountability in confronting oppression. The confession of Dayton Dean and the prosecutions that followed illustrate that even the most secretive and powerful organizations are vulnerable when individuals choose to act in alignment with justice. Communities, law enforcement, and leaders who work tirelessly to expose wrongdoing and restore the rule of law demonstrate that extremism, no matter how entrenched, can be challenged and dismantled. This lesson resonates not only as a historical account but also as a call to action, emphasizing that awareness, vigilance, and moral responsibility are essential tools in preventing the rise or resurgence of similar threats. The broader cultural impact of the Black Legion also underscores how covert domestic terrorism can influence society in subtle yet profound ways. Beyond the immediate acts of violence and intimidation, the Legion shaped perceptions of security, trust, and governance, influencing political discourse, civil rights movements, and public consciousness regarding the fragility of societal protections. By understanding the mechanisms of control employed by the Legion, fear, secrecy, infiltration, and structured violence, we gain insight into the ways in which extremist ideology can exploit vulnerabilities within democratic systems, and how communities can work collectively to resist manipulation and preserve justice. Ultimately, the Black Legion serves as a stark example of the dangers posed when hatred and extremism are allowed to flourish in secrecy, and how the careful combination of ideology, organizational discipline, and strategic violence can threaten not just individuals, but the very fabric of society. Yet, the story also demonstrates the resilience of justice and the capacity for societal systems, when engaged, to respond to hidden threats, hold perpetrators accountable, and provide protection for vulnerable populations. It is a testament to the importance of vigilance, the courage to confront wrongdoing, and the enduring need for transparency and accountability in all levels of governance. As we reflect on this chapter of history, let it remind us that the struggle against extremism is ongoing, and that understanding the past equips us to recognize, confront, and prevent similar threats in our communities today. By studying the Black Legion, we honor the victims, learn from the mistakes of the past, and empower ourselves to advocate for a society rooted in equality, justice, and shared humanity. Their story is not merely history, it is a lesson in courage, awareness, and the necessity of collective action to protect democratic values against those who would seek to undermine them from within. Thank you so much for watching and joining us on this journey into a hidden chapter of American history. If you found this video enlightening, inspiring, or eye-opening, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal truths often left out of textbooks. Your support helps us continue uncovering history's hidden corners, shedding light on the past to better understand the present. Stay informed, stay curious, and remember, history is a guide to shaping a fairer, safer, and more just future.